All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Money Matters in Sports.
Potato matters.
Yeah, potato matters too. Yeah, of course, which is good. But we're very lucky to have today joining us from the Raine Group, Colin Neville. Colin's been involved in some of the largest deals in sports. So he was involved with the sale of the Clippers many years ago, back in 2014. That was one where we first saw sports rights. That went for $2 billion, and people were shocked at the size of that valuation. And look at where valuations of sports have gone since. He also was part of the purchase of the Brooklyn Nets and the Barclays Center in New York and selling that to Joe Tsai. As well, was part of the $4 billion sale of Endeavor of UFC to the purchase of UFC by Endeavor many years ago, and most recently the signing of Chelsea, or is the sale of Chelsea, which
sale of Chelsea.
Huge, Chelsea FC. So he was involved in the sale of that. So very interesting background. We're going to go through some of that discussion today, but take us through first, why are you in Singapore?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and excited to be here. I'm in Singapore because we're very excited to open our latest office here. One of the first offices that we opened outside of New York when we started our company in 2009 was in China. And with a lot of the capital flow that we've seen sort of moving north-south to Southeast Asia, we think it's an opportune time to plant our flag and have some people on the ground here. So that's part of the reason, but of course I'm here to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, welcome. It's great to have you here, and great to see the movement. And certainly, as we've seen, Singapore continues to move from strength to strength in terms of the sports industry, in terms of the growth of the ecosystem around it, the number of events that are coming in, the number of leagues and teams and offices that are setting up here in the market, and with real opportunity and potential. We're going to explore some of those issues today, but as well, what we want to do is to have a discussion about just the general state of sports around the world. So we've obviously had a massive event, COVID, which impacted the world, and what I wanted to talk a bit about was, what's your take on the state of the world right now in the world of sports finance in a post-COVID world?
Great question. It's definitely robust right now. If you rewind back to March 2020, I was actually at a PGA Tour event, golf down in Florida, and the world shut down. The NBA was the first to cancel it. I think it was the Minnesota Timberwolves game. And no one really knew what to expect, of course. I would say the first 6 months or so was largely triage from the leagues and the teams. Just, imagine several revenue streams evaporating overnight, which bled into a lot of media companies, sort of pulling back on their spend in contracts and not wanting to fill their contracts because the games weren't on. All that being said, cost didn't change, right, for teams and leagues. So it was a very challenging time. It also was a period where we witnessed new creative financing structures around teams and leagues that really hadn't been utilized before. And I'm talking a lot about some of the deals that the European football leagues have done about financing their media rights contracts. And then team investments specifically. So I think we're through that period. Thankfully, fans are back in stadiums. Athletes are playing, largely vaccinated. So I'm not surprised that records continue to be set for selling these teams, which is a core theme that we believe in Raine, that sports is the most powerful form of content in the world. But certainly was a challenging period, and but we're on the other side of it, it feels like.
I mean, it's amazing to see what happened and what the adaptations that took place. I mean, in many cases you saw new revenue streams actually developing, or at least new types of assets to exploit. Like when you think about sports, one of the key things you do is you're looking at different ways to leverage new technologies, new revenue streams, new ways to reach consumers. And so I think we saw some of that. We saw, we kind of got to see, behind the curtain with different athletes training. You saw huge amounts of shifts like that. Were there any of these new technologies or new developments that you found interesting or very different in terms of new revenue streams or opportunities?
Well, we're biased because I'm based in New York, and one of the big trends over the last couple of years is the advent of legalized sports gambling in the U.S., which has driven tremendous amount of dollars into the sports ecosystem, a little bit behind the curve relative to many other parts of the world. We were fortunate. We invested in 2014 in a company called DraftKings, and we were the largest shareholder there. before that company went public, and it just sort of found money for a lot of teams. There was a marketing war for customers, and so there was a lot of money spent on sponsorships and new activations that wasn't there. And then I think a lot of the interesting developments we've seen around content, I'm sure people have followed, all sort of the behind the scenes. Formula One really led the way. Well, actually the NFL, if you really rewind back to Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
But new ways of reaching the fan and telling the stories that are not necessarily on the field or on the pitch or on the court, because there was nothing to show for a long period of time. Very true, and amazing how that opened up this whole genre. Now it's everywhere. You're literally seeing almost every league or team are looking to do some of this. So an amazing development. I think one of the other things that it's going to be interesting to see is this next round of media rights, sale and acquisition. They seem to be continuing to move and grow. And so what's happening there? I mean, it's amazing because everyone said, oh, it's going to be the end of sports. No one's going to sponsor anything anymore. Not true. It's actually these rights are going up and there's bigger opportunities. That's correct. There is a little bit of a have and have not dynamic where some rights have retrenched a little bit around European football in the last couple of years. But I get asked this question every 2 years or so, like, when do you think media rights are going to stop going up? The answer is as long as there is more competition from whether it's new linear partners, new streamers, I don't see an end to it. In the United States, it's literally the only thing that's holding together the cable bundle it's really the NFL. It's not even other sports. What we like to say is if you're aligned with the rights holder, more competition for distribution is typically a good thing. Yeah. So again, Apple, Amazon, all these new players that hadn't really looked at live sports historically, making big waves. Amazon's Thursday night NFL deal, which this is the first couple games started this season. It blew out expectations on viewers in the U.S. Apple just signed a 10-year deal with Major League Soccer, $2.5 billion. So you've got these new entrants, and then you have on the other side a lot of the legacy players that are holding on for dear life. But it's interesting because if you look at the biggest properties in the world, the NFL being the biggest, at least domestically, $10 billion per year rights deal, they've built into their latest contract at year 7, they can sort of pull out of it and revisit based on trends and what's happening with direct-to-consumer and streaming. So it's an interesting time. I'm pretty bullish. I don't see media rights for at least premier properties going down anytime soon. Yeah, no, it's so interesting, and also just how they're slicing the rights, the new entrants, the new ways that they're presented. It's amazing. The time to be a fan is incredible. The type of content, the nature. Well, if you rewind back to the Premier League as an example in the U.S., I think their first deal with NBC was roughly $200 million a year. That's more than tripled. Yeah. So more sports are reaching more fans. I had a lot of sort of friends that didn't even know what the Premier League was 10 years ago, and now everyone's got their own team. So technology's helping to democratize access. Most definitely. So with these increased valuations, we're also seeing some really interesting changes in terms of team ownership structures. So perhaps we can talk a bit about that. Obviously these valuations are increasing, but take me through a little bit on the ownership structure and what's changing. Like there's something different. It's not just the family running the teams, although there are some left, or maybe just a corporate. There's a lot more access to capital and a lot more opportunities to invest in teams and leagues and what have you. Yeah, you have to think of it in a couple different buckets. There's sort of the closed ecosystem in U.S. sports, and then outside of the U.S., and I'll use football as the proxy, really sort of independent companies, and the leagues are sort of loose federations. But they operate more independently. You can do more with your rights. You can exploit brand in ways that you can't in Western markets. But rewind back, before I was in this business, a lot of these teams were purchased 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago, handed down through a family. And it was a vanity asset, still a vanity asset, at least on the team side in many ways. But because media rights have increased, because there are new ways to monetize consumers than just selling them hot dogs and beers at games, these have become incredibly profitable assets in many cases. And so if you couple that with what happened during COVID with the need for capital and a lot of leagues sort of loosening their rules around institutional investors coming into these assets, it's sort of the perfect storm, which is helping also to drive up valuations. But people view this as a very, very downside protected asset class. By the way, incredible in a time like this where we're likely, I'm not an economist, but it feels like heading into a recession, certainly in Europe. We'll see in the US. But teams have outperformed almost every major index over the last 25 years, S&P 500. The values are going up. And that's because of the scarcity value as well. But these teams are now starting to generate significant cash flows.
Yeah, which is interesting. We were working with a team, an acquisition of a team in the Premier League, and one of the things there was the cash flow, which is quite interesting. But as well, they had looked around North America. They were quite active in North American leagues, had done well, and they went, you know what, it's very expensive in North America, so let's look to Europe, and then let's take that approach where it's not just Europe, but it's global. So it's interesting seeing those changes. The other thing I think, too, is that, as we have this fragmentation of media, it's obviously, what's interesting is these are shared experiences that we all have live. It's that one thing that is consistent across, whatever sport it is and whatever sports you're a fan of. That's a real opportunity there, I think, and that's going to continue to, I think, drive those valuations. Let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about some of the current events that are shaping some of these acquisitions in the finance industry. So clearly one that you worked on very closely, obviously the sale of Chelsea. Take me through that, and how was that different than some of these other deals that you worked on? And clearly that one went really quickly.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a book there.
Or a movie, or something. Yeah. Hard to summarize that experience. It was from start to finish about 80 days. We had previously worked with Chelsea on a variety of sort of corporate initiatives, including how to build their presence in Asia. Crazy stat that I didn't really appreciate until this part of the sale process. If you believe what management said, 500 million global Chelsea fans, less than 5% in the UK, which is pretty staggering. So 250 million plus fans in Asia, broadly speaking, but really hadn't done much to monetize it. But back to the sale process, we were working on sort of stadium projects with them, media content, and tapping into the Asia market when we got a call that the situation, the war in Ukraine, would likely lead to Abramovich having to sell the club. We were fortunate in that we had done a lot of work. We were prepared. Had a couple inbounds from the Middle East actually before all this broke, so we were ready to go. But within essentially 2 weeks from saying he's going to sell the club and then he's going to donate the proceeds to charity, we had probably 250 plus inbounds. Wow. In conversations with potential buyers. We had about 40 people in in our world, sort of a data room, which has all the information about the club. And we had first round bids within 2.5 weeks of launching the sale process, which, I don't think there's ever been a process that's moved that quickly, certainly not in sports. Wow. And then you layer on all the other externalities that we had to deal with, where the UK government, required the club to operate under a specific license. They couldn't spend more than £20,000. The team couldn't travel on airplanes. Our client was sanctioned. Everyone around him was sanctioned, so we couldn't even talk to him. Wow. It was certainly a tricky situation. And then the level of press scrutiny. There's always a lot of press in the UK around football. People are pretty passionate there, rightfully so. But this was unlike anything I've certainly ever experienced. But I guess the surprise to many people was at the outset, people thought this was going to be a fire sale. And I think we knew that, no, this is Chelsea Football Club. This is one of the biggest brands in all of sports. And we were able to hopefully shepherd it to the right owner. But there was a tremendous amount of interest, record price for a team, and then a pretty unique transaction structure where the seller wanted to make sure that the team ended up in the right long-term sort of steward type hands. So we created the structure where all the new potential buyers had to commit to spending what ended up being £1.75 billion over 10 years to invest into the club, to invest into the women's team, to invest into the academy business, which is without using debt. So we had all these strange guardrails, and I think if we had more time and didn't have to sort of abide by those rules, we probably would have sold it for more, which is maybe hard to believe, but based on our interest. was not surprising to me.
What an amazing experience, and of course it must have been super challenging. But again, you got the deal done, which is amazing.
It was super challenging. Yeah.
And I mean, that is a book or a movie for sure at some point. No, that's great. And so we're also seeing some shifts taking place with the Phoenix Suns. Similar to maybe what happened years back with Sterling. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, there's a lot of U.S. teams on the market right now, which is rare.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure the leagues behind the scenes do a good job of trying to sort of slow the supply of teams that hit the market, because that's part of how values have gone up, is demand that always outpaces the supply.
Yeah.
But Major League Baseball, there's I think 3 teams on the market right now. So we'll see how that impacts values. But the Suns will draw more interest than any previous NBA team. There will be interest from the Middle East. There will be a ton of interest from Asia. In Chelsea, we had multiple. I know there's a lot of crypto in Web3 here. We had multiple crypto at the time. They were billionaires, maybe not so much anymore, looking to buy the club. So I think you'll see those same types of buyers emerge in the Suns process. And NBA is a pretty global business, as you know. So it'll
very
be
much
robust.
Yeah, and certainly very much a broad interest, certainly investment here, which again is one of the reasons to have your office here with the shift, of course, with a lot of the wealth that's being shifted here to Singapore.
Yep.
2 other areas that I think are been pretty interesting, and just really the rise of athletes as investors, and as well the whole the amount of investment going into women and sports. So there's some big growth there.
Yeah. I don't view athletes investors, that whole phenomenon, really any different than the celebrity investor. Some of these major athletes are bigger than their teams, bigger than their leagues in many cases in terms of followers. So they're smartly utilizing their reach. Really, it's about access to deals. They're getting shown a lot of deals. There's not many athletes that I come across that are writing big checks into deals. They're typically riding alongside a lead investor, but. This is sort of a 2 sides of the coin for me. When we have multiple investment funds, and when we're looking at deals, if the management team or the company is touting the fact that celebrities or athletes have invested, it's sometimes not always the best sign, because you're trying to piggyback on their celebrity and reach to supercharge growth as opposed to the fundamentals of the business. But there are definitely a lot of examples where athletes have been incredibly helpful. To your point on women's sports, it's a topic, at least at Raine, that we've been very focused on. We've spent a lot of time with the WSL, the Super League, working on a couple projects in the U.S. around the NWSL right now, which is the women's football league. There are some recent games. I think Barca, Real Madrid women had 90,000+ people, attend the match. The women's the Euro, which was incredible. I think where England won, just a tremendous amount of passion. I think the economics are slowly catching up. This week, we looked at the W Series, which is a pretty interesting asset around Formula 1. For people that don't know, this is women's racing that will probably be Saturday. I think they'll have a race. So, once the economics catch up, money's going to pour in. It's starting to. Sponsors are seeing the benefit, not only just from this is a good thing for the world to be supporting women's sports, but there's actually real ROI now.
Yeah, it's incredible, that shift, and it's great to see. It really is, and just see the level of growth and all these different leagues being invested in and maturing, and I think it'll definitely catch up.
Yeah, no question. One of the highlights of the Chelsea sale process, their women's team is incredible. If it's not the best in the world, it's top 3, and many investors were focused on that, which was a great sign. And I think last week we just heard that the IPL in India is about to sort of announce and sell franchises for a women's series, which is pretty exciting. Which
is fantastic. Okay, let's turn to Asia. So again, you're setting up the office now, and so you've had one in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Mumbai, but you've now set it up in Singapore, which is significant. A lot of family offices have moved here recently, of course. Lots of money, not just around Asia, but is around Southeast Asia, which is some great development. So there's kind of, if you think about Asia, different regions. So you've got think of North Asia, where it's Japan, Korea, you've got China in there, where they've got leagues that have been developed. Any thoughts on how to unlock some more value in those leagues? Anything that you can see there? Because they've been fairly traditional, but there seems to be big opportunity there. And I know that you're a big fan of what does sports need. Needs more innovation. We work in that space as well, and thoughts on what they could do to unlock that value?
Yeah, I think sort of think of it in 3 buckets, and I'll talk about Southeast Asia. Short term, one of the youngest growing populations, mobile first. Time spent online, I think, is the highest in the world. Massive consumers of sports content and merch. That probably in the near term, that's where you'll see leagues, federations, teams spending their time. I think midterm, hubs for huge international events like this week, but really long term, growing local talent is critical. The competition here relative to Europe and the West is behind. I don't think that's really debated. But once you're able to grow local talent, academies on the ground, find the next Yao Ming, I think you'll start to see a lot of these leagues take off. We invested in a growing league here called the EASL, East Asian Super League, and basketball tournament. So we're excited about the growth. We think there's huge opportunity, and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, we were hoping to have Matt and Henry here for the event, but they're getting ready to launch the league. They were our first client, so we've worked with them quite closely, but we believe in what they're doing. We think that there's a real opportunity for them to transform basketball in Asia with kind of leapfrogging and finding opportunities there. Certainly one of the things you highlighted very much, local heroes and developing local talent throughout the region. I think that'll definitely come through. You've had the traditional sports of sort of in Southeast Asia, badminton, ping pong, that could grow and continue to do better. I think there's opportunities there for sure. Talk to me a little bit about esports, because I know you do some work in that space as well. It's not so much your remit, but there's a growing opportunity there. And when we look at esports, we don't just think of joysticks and keyboards. We start to think more immersive sports over time as well. But I think there's some opportunities there.
Yeah, esports is a challenging one. I think it was a little bit too early. People got too excited about it as a asset class too early, and really the economics were controlled by the publishers, the gaming publishers, and so it was very hard for teams to make money. Obviously, the streaming aspect is huge, and the creator economy, and certain athletes can do very well. I think we're bullish long term around esports, but the sort of the profit pools within the industry has to change for it to be sustainable, because today it's really a marketing expense, and there's not many people making money on esports. But of course the trends are the trends. Kids are going to be playing video games more than they're going to be playing sports in 20 years, like traditional sports.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is that, and certainly some of the view here is that it's a way, people aren't just, it's not like binary, it's not like you're an esports fan and you do nothing else. What we see is actually a lot of interesting crossovers between the two. And at one of the events, actually one of the EASL events, we brought in the team that eventually was the world champ in League of Legends, and the basketball players and the esports guy. It was funny how they were both super excited to meet each other, because they both kind of do that. But certainly, esports, if you think in this community, if this area, could be that part of that on-ramp to even larger fandom and larger opportunities there.
Yeah, and a lot of the major traditional teams, meeting on the court, field, pitch, whatever, have their own esports teams, right? So that link is already there.
Starting to grow.
Yeah.
In terms of Southeast Asia, so again, tied into the sports, where do you see some of the opportunities there in terms of growing out local talent, tied into local leagues, things of that nature in this region?
Yeah. We just helped. This is not necessarily, directly relatable, but about a year ago we helped the Australian Football League raise about $100 million from a U.S.-based Silver Lake. It's a very global investment firm. Investors in Manchester City, Endeavor, UFC, very very well respected. A lot of experience in sports. They saw a huge opportunity, not to be obnoxious and say sort of bringing best practices to Australia, but that really, it was early days, and so focusing on ways to distribute content, really helping the team ecosystem. You'll, as owners get more sophisticated in the region, I think that'll be good for the long term. When you have sort of owners that are not fully bought in, it tends to create challenges over the long term, and the health of the leagues are typically driven by the health of the owners.
I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity and room to grow here, certainly, as you said, tied into best practices. Again, one of the things that I found interesting in Asia over the time I've been here is that one of the things tied in, you said young population, mobile friendly, 5G, investment by government, is that it tends to leapfrog. So there's a real opportunity there, I think.
Yeah, no,
this is great.
Agree with
so fantastic to have you in Singapore. Congratulations on opening the office, and looking forward to great news about all the different developments and growth of the sports ecosystem here in Asia.
Fantastic.
That's great. It's been
Thanks
great
a lot.
to have you here, Colin.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.